In today's episode, I discuss the merits of rereading books that you've already read in the past. Welcome to Monologues by Hassie. One thing that I'm starting to find that I'm hearing more when I speak to my friends who are avid readers is that people will reread certain books again. And that seems a bit weird. You might read a book and then look for the next one. You want something new. But I've done this myself in the past, and there's a very good reason to reread something you've already read. A great example of a book that I reread many times, I think I've reread it 3 times now, is The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. I think the first time I read it was in university, and when I read it as in the context of being a student. And as a student, I was focused on doing well in my assignments, doing well in tests, coming out of university with a good grade. And so that was really my focus, and obviously there were other things that were important. I reread it again when I entered the workforce properly, full-time. And that also had a different perspective. I was now thinking about my effectiveness as a person at work, in my relationships outside of work, how I was as a boyfriend. These were things that I was thinking about when I reread it, and I reread it 3rd time not too long ago, about 1.5 years ago, before I took this trip around the world. And every time I reread 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen Covey, I pulled something different out of the book each time. And I think the same goes for other experiences I've had. If I take Vipassana, for example, the meditation retreat, similar thing. Every time I did it, I pulled something out that was relevant to a challenge or the stage in life I was dealing with. So books are very much the same in this regard. And if you have read a book and it is a good book, then there's time to revisit it. For example, I repicked up The Challenger Sale, which is a sales book. It's about, mastering the conversation you have with your customers. And the first time I read it, I believe I was a software engineer, so I read it out of curiosity. One of my friends is an account executive, so I was very curious to learn about what he does in his job, at the things that he's thinking about. And I also wanted to do a better job at working with the salespeople in my company, because part of my job was to help train them in our product. So I wanted to know how they were thinking when they were going to their prospects, even though that wasn't my job. So I read The Challenger Sale back then, and I've recently picked it up now. I'm only a couple of pages in, but now I'm in a sales role. And being in a sales role, when I do read sales literature now, I'm reading it from a very different perspective. I'm almost reading it so I can apply something or improve how I'm doing something and make these small improvements day by day. So there is a lot of value of reading, rereading. I think good literature that you've come across. Another book that I personally reread is Alex Hormozi's $100 Million Offers and $100 Million Leads. Again, I read these during different phases. I think I need to reread them again because I know there's a lot of deficiencies in my knowledge and the way I come up with offers. And so this is one of these things where if you find a good piece of literature and it has resonated with you in the past, it doesn't matter what it is. It could be a business book. It could be a book on athletic performance. It could be a book on health. It could be a book on spirituality. If it has resonated with you, then it makes sense to go back and read that. Maybe it's a book on politics, and maybe rereading it a couple of years, a decade later, maybe it was a really insightful book on politics or economics. You can kind of gauge how you have changed, right? Maybe you're going to pull a different lesson out. Maybe you'll come out with a different perspective than you had when you first read it. But I wouldn't reserve this right for everything, not for every book I read. But there are particular books that do really resonate, and that is going to be unique to you. Obviously, I've listed 3 that I have reread and am currently rereading, being The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, $100 Million Offers and Leads, and I'm currently rereading The Challenger Sale because that's now my job. That's a skill set that I'm actively improving by having taken up a job that is in sales. I cold call executives now. And for me, that's a very challenging thing to do. There's a lot for me to learn. But I have been getting better by practicing the skill during my 9 to 5. But outside of that, by absorbing some of this information, which I may have been exposed to in the past, but I'm now pulling a very different context out of it. So look, this is a relatively short episode. My prompt to those of you listening to this is, what is a good piece of literature? And you know what? Maybe it's not even nonfiction. Maybe it is something that is fiction that you want to reread and revisit and pull something else out of. But what is something that deeply resonated with you that you believe is worth rereading? And should you actually, and maybe you should prioritize that, or should you prioritize that above something new you want to read this year? And I think having a mix of a few things that you've revisited in the distant past that resonated, it might make sense to go and read them again. And hopefully you'll pull out something more valuable this time. So I'm going to end this episode there. And to all of you listening to this, I wish you great success on all your endeavors. You've just made it through another episode of Monologues by Hassie. It brings me great pleasure to know that you made it to the end. To listen to more episodes, subscribe on your favorite podcast app or visit monologuesbyhassie.com. Thanks for swinging by.